Week one is finally here. Welcome into the Fantasy Coffee Break. I'm your host, Cody Capola, joined as always by Conan Grun and Aaron Hale. Today we're going to be going over our starts and sits of the week for the first week of the NFL season. Conan, who are you starting us off with?
So I'm going to go with a big-time name, but I think a lot of people are pretty hesitant or skeptical about if they should actually start him. And that guy is Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals going up against the San Francisco 49ers and their vicious defense. So obviously we all know Kyler was drafted as a top or in between the quarterback 3 and the 6. Basically, I haven't seen him anywhere above or below that in any ADPs or rankings. And so if you got him, you invested at least a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick in him. And so I understand if you're questioning, or it's hard to not want to play him, but then you see this matchup against the 49ers and you're like, ooh, like that's about as tough as it gets for first week for this guy who has now a massive weapon on his offense. But I say, don't worry about it. So I'm looking at last year's numbers too, when he didn't have DeAndre Hopkins and he played the 49ers. Those were actually 2 of his best games on the year last year. And so in those 2 games, he had 26.7 fantasy points. He had 23 fantasy points, 2 games, 2 passing touchdowns in each game. He had a rushing touchdown in his first game as well. And for some reason, when he played against this really good defense last year, he found a way to perform. And they didn't actually win either of the games. But as we all know, you don't need to win the game to have a very productive fantasy total. And then when we get past the matchup and we look at his numbers from last year, his rookie season, it's hard not to like some of the stuff you see. And he put up 24 passing touchdowns in his rookie year with Christian Kirk as his number 1 option in the passing game. And that's not a knock against Christian Kirk, but I don't think anyone sees him as a true number 1 receiver option on a team. And then he put up 4 rushing touchdowns as well. He had a 64% completion rate. And so the biggest thing for Kyler Murray last year, what propelled him into that top 10 is his rushing. And that's why I'm very high on him. And that's why I think a lot of other analysts are very high on him. He reached 500 rushing yards last year. For a quarterback, that's just amazing. And so you look at numbers for the top quarterbacks every year in fantasy, and it's very rare that one of these guys doesn't have at least 200 yards rushing. And if you get up to that top 5, almost all of them, top 5, top 7, almost all of them have 300, 400, 500. We all know Lamar beat the 1,000-yard mark, but plenty of the top guys, they give you that added value with their legs. And I think that's what Kyler does. And even in this tough matchup, I think you got to just stick with him with that price tag you paid. What do you guys think?
Christian Kirk is definitely not DeAndre Hopkins. So, I mean, I'm all there for you. With everything he was able to do last year against San Francisco, somehow those interconference or interdivision games are bringing out the best of them. The biggest thing to me that kind of sets us apart is that as good as Kyler Murray was last year against San Francisco, he was never a great red zone quarterback. Having Hopkins there and having a legitimate red zone threat to be able to put him over the hump is honestly what's going to make the difference there. So I love it. I think it's a great option to pick. I've already seen him show up as a sit on a handful of other websites. So I know some people are questioning this and they're looking to see if they need to pivot and don't try and don't get cute. Like, don't overthink things.
Yeah, I agree. Like Conan said, that rushing upside definitely makes it intriguing every single week. Kyler's one of those players with that 500-plus rushing yard, I would say floor. He's somebody that you have to almost start every week just because of that. And, I mean, it's probably the best time to play that San Francisco 49er defense. I mean, with the limited training camp, who knows how much rust there is. You might as well just get it out the way. You know what I'm saying? I mean, this may be the best
sloppy
opportunity.
tackles.
Sloppy tackles. We've seen that. we seen that on both sides kind of
Mhm.
on Thursday. So I think that's a great start. Great start.
So I'm actually going to be going with Allen Robinson going against the Detroit Lions. Mitchell Trubisky has thrived in his last few games against Detroit, putting up over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in 3 of the last 4 meetings. In those meetings, he was the quarterback 8, quarterback 7, and quarterback 1. Matt Nagy has done a fantastic job moving Robinson all around the field, giving 35% of his plays from the slot, 35 from the left side of the field, and then 28 from the other side of the field. And actually trying to figure out ways to make mismatches against these defenses and force the ball into his hands. Talking about those mismatches in the defense, you've got Desmond Trufant coming over from Atlanta, having to adjust from going from a zone scheme into a man scheme. You've got rookie cornerback Jeff Okudah having to just adjust to the NFL game as a whole. And we just don't see rookie cornerbacks performing early in their career. And then Justin Coleman working in the slot. You got just absolutely torched by Anthony Miller last year for over 100 yards and a touchdown. I don't see a situation where Allen Robinson is going to be shut down and should just take over this game for 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards if I had to put a number onto it.
I sure hope so, man. I have a lot of shares of Allen Robinson, and me going with my 0 running back strategy. I mean, he's my offense. I need him to put up 2 touchdowns. That's just what I'm hoping for. But just for a reference of what he did last year, I mean, he had an average stat line of the last 5 games of 5.5 catches, 85 yards, and 0.7 5 touchdowns, putting him at about a little over 18 points per game, fantasy-wise. I mean, I think it's a great matchup. Like you did mention, that Detroit secondary is not necessarily the most dominant by any means, and I definitely think Mitch Trubisky is going to try to prove a point. He's going to gunsling it as far as he can go. Also, with Montgomery playing, I think that definitely does help Allen Robinson's situation, rather than if he was sitting out, they would definitely just forget about the running back position probably. So with him even being on the field, even though he's probably not fully recovered, he's still somebody that Detroit has to pay attention to. So Allen Robinson will most likely have more opportunities than usual. What about you, Conan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. He's my number 1 receiver on a handful of different teams where you employ that, running back or running back tight end, first 2-round strategy.
Yeah.
And I agree. I like the matchup. Detroit, definitely a leaky defense. And then I also like the fact that, they picked up Ted Ginn in the offseason. He gives them a true deep threat that basically Allen Robinson had to be part-time the past year or two. And so that should open up just better looks for him, more manufactured for him as a player rather than having to send him out on the long routes sometimes. Yeah. And then also, I mean, if Anthony Miller can even break out in a slight way, like a lot of people expect, I think that just opens up more things. We know Taylor Gabriel left, so those are some vacated targets right off the bat that have to kind of be spread out along the offense. And if there's another player that's going to be taking some of that attention away from Allen, where he's not just the only guy on that offense, I think that only does good things for him. So I love the pick. Hope he explodes in a major way.
Yeah, I definitely think he will. At least we hope so, right, Conan?
Yeah.
But my start for the week is Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry versus Cincinnati. Now, Cincinnati has had a lot of attention lately, but I can assure you that it's not on the defensive side. They definitely have a very suspect defense. They were bottom 10 against tight ends last year, giving up about a little under 400 yards a game last year. And with Mike Williams being injured, we don't know if he's going to start or not, but it's probably a little unlikely that he actually gets that game time nod. With him being out, Henry definitely becomes that probably number 2 target in that offense. Of course, Keenan Allen with that heavy contract he just got, he's going to want some attention the whole year. So we can definitely shoot him as the number 1 option in that offense. But Hunter Henry definitely becomes more of a targeted option because of Mike Williams' injury. With Tyrod starting, I think he definitely targets his tight ends somewhat well. He did 22% in Buffalo. So I think this is a good option. Hunter Henry is primed to have a successful season as long as it's a full season. So let's pray for that. But first game, he's healthy. So let's play him like it. What about you, Conan?
Yeah, I mean, I like the pick there. He's a classic guy you scoop if you missed out on those, top 5, 6, depending on where you stand, those tight ends. If you didn't get one of those top guys, then I think he's one of the best options there were afterwards. Yeah. And you mentioned Cincinnati, not really a lot of talk on the defense. They actually did sign a couple guys, but nothing really impacting their secondary specifically. Yeah. More so on the line guys and some linebackers, which might help a little bit in getting Henry. But I think Henry's a surefire guy. He's had a 72% catch completion rate both of his years when he's healthy. And he's just a big target that Tyrod will look for in the end zone. But even in the middle of the field, if he needs, a little chunk play, move the chains, he's your guy. If Keenan's double, triple covered with no one behind him. And then obviously Eckler figures to be involved heavily in that passing game as well. But that's basically only 3 options I can really think of that are going to get more than 1 or 2 targets in that game. Yep. So
True.
What about you, Cody?
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. One, there's just no depth on that team. I mean, if you take a look outside of Williams, you have rookie KJ Hill and then a bunch of guys who've never really done anything in the league. You have Keenan operating in the middle. You've got Eckler operating on some of the shorter passes. Then you have Henry as the deep threat. So I think he's going to be forced to be heavily involved. And frankly, it's the Will Fuller effect. The issue's never been the talent with Hunter Henry. It's been the health. If he is fully healthy right now in an offense that he is slated to be heavily featured, you start him. Yeah. So at this point, to me, he's kind of one of those locked in options, especially early on in the year. If health does eventually catch up to him and we only get 6 or 7 games out of him, that's fine. But he's going to be a top 6, top 7 option each one of those weeks. Sure. Now moving over, we've got the less fun ones to talk about, but the sits of the week. So we actually have a nice little variety here, and I'm going to start off with one that you might not even be considering starting, but I have seen pop up all over the internet as a dark horse starter. And we just need to stop. That's James Robinson, the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, Jacksonville Jaguars running back going up against the Indianapolis Colts defense. With Leonard Fournette being shipped out of town and with the opening of their running back core with Raekwon Armstead also being on the COVID list and then the Devine Ozigbo being injured, it seems like it's going to be the James Robinson show. But think about what you're actually getting on that team. First off, Leonard Fournette was as valuable as Leonard Fournette was, not just because of his rushing involvement, but because he had 100 targets. Chris Thompson is there now. Laviska Shenault, even though he's listed as a wide receiver, is going to get a lot of those line of scrimmage targets that Fournette feasted on last year. So you ostensibly have a David Montgomery-esque running only running back on a bad team that's only supposed to project for 18 total points if you follow what Vegas is doing. I personally don't want to invest heavily or depend heavily on somebody who's going to be in a low-scoring game, who's not going to be involved in the passing work. It's just it seems to me like people are trying to get a little bit smarter than they need to be. And where you drafted him, you have other options. No one drafted James Robinson as a running back 1, a running back 2, or even a running back 3. He was a nice thing that you were able to pick up, put on your bench, and he might develop into something. But as of right now, I'm not going to try and be the smartest guy in the room and plant my flag on that. I'm going to be able to take a step back and go for some safer options.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not touching that Jacksonville offense at all this year. Maybe DJ Chark. I do have DJ Chark in a couple leagues, but I'm not touching any running back situation. I mean, we don't even know. It's a start, but he could lose that rushing share easily. He could be outshined by a couple players on that offense in the running back position anyway. So, I mean, this is not a hard one to decide by any means. This is literally a desperate play if you do start him anyway. So, I definitely am not touching him. So, I definitely agree. What about you, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing you got to consider is the game script, which against the Colts, who have a much better all-around team.
Much better everything.
Yeah, it's just they got a better O-line, a better defense, a better offense. Like everything involved is much better on the Colts. And so I just don't see how Jacksonville is going to really be in a spot where they're going to be wanting to be running the ball a lot. And if you're not a pass catcher on that team, I don't want any part of it. I don't want any part of you. Right. So I have my Chris Thompson shares. I know how much he's loved over there, and just his pass catching skills are phenomenal. It's always he's been just like Will Fuller or Hunter Henry. He just keeps getting hurt. When he's healthy, he does produce. He's a PPR monster out of the backfield if he has the health. But it just doesn't seem like a smart play with how bad that O-line is, and just the negative game script it figures to be.
Yeah. And doubling down on that negative game script, they only run the ball 30% of the time when they are trailing by more than 3 points. And they'll be trailing by more than 3 points about probably 2.5 minutes into the game.
Exactly.
So again, it's do you really want that 30%? Do you want that in that low scoring of a game with no touchdown upside, no pass volume upside? Just I'll fully pass, and I'll sit James Robinson in week 1.
Right.
All right. So for my next guy, I'm going to go with AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals versus that Los Angeles Chargers, that dreaded secondary. But actually, fuck that. I'm starting that over.
Lord knows I do it enough.
Yeah, we're good. All right. So for my next guy, I'm going to go with AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals. And his matchup this week is going to be the Los Angeles Chargers. And for me, this is really just a case of I haven't seen it in so long. I just want to see something first. We all know the type of player and the talent AJ is and has, but we haven't seen it in too long, where I'm just too hesitant to want to slot him right into my starting lineup after basically 2 years of inactivity. And so we all remember 2017, his last real healthy season. He's still a 1,000-yard receiver. He's a 1,000-yard receiver if he's healthy. We just don't know what it's going to look like, and if he's really healthy to the point where he looks like he did in 2017 and earlier. And so I just don't like, one, that we haven't seen it in a while, but two, his matchup is definitely very tough to start the year on. I mean, you have the Los Angeles Chargers, their secondaries, I would say, arguably top 3 in the league, even though all the news recently has been surrounding Derwin James and his season-ending injury. They still have a really quality secondary. And so that's Casey Hayward, who's a top 5 cornerback. I don't think anyone would argue. And then they just brought in Chris Harris Jr., who should be a great corner for some of these slot guys that they might have had trouble on last year. And then on top of that, they added a first-round pick this year, Kenneth Murray, who figures to slot right in as their second cornerback. And then even when you go over to the safeties, with the loss of Derwin James, you still have quality players. So you have Nazir Adderley, who was a second-round pick last year. And then you have Desmond King, who's been around for a couple of years and can fill in at multiple positions. I just want to see something. I just want to see what AJ's got left in the tank. And maybe he proves me completely wrong and he's 2015 explosive AJ. I'll look ridiculous here, but I just haven't seen it. It's got to be something I see on the field, and he's got to pass the eye test for me, really, before I can feel fully confident sticking him in my lineup. I don't know where you guys feel on him, but
yeah. So I'm in agreement with you. Even though I have lofty expectations for Burrows this year, his very first game going up against an aggressive secondary with Joey Bosa coming off the edge, you probably have better options. And also, if the Chargers actually do push their focus onto AJ Green, the Bengals also have better options. There's been camp reports that Burrows has had a great connection with Auden Tate. John Ross is going to be fully healthy and back. T. Higgins, the rookie, is still going to be there, and Tyler Boyd last year was able to produce. So I don't think that they're going to necessarily have to force it to any one player. And with everything that's happened with AJ, same thing. I want to see him actually out in the field. I want to know what's going on. and you probably didn't draft him all that high. So you should be able to have some other options that have better matchups, and you don't necessarily need to try and swing for the fences on this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Kansas City defense just may be too much for Joe Burrow's first game, man.
You think the Los Angeles defense too?
Los Angeles, I'm sorry. I don't know what I said. But the Chargers defense definitely is too much for him as a rookie, man. And I personally think he's a bit overrated as well. I mean, he had one of the most stacked college offenses that we've seen in a long time. So I don't think the Cincinnati offense is comparable as far as like the level above all the competition. So I think that GB squad, those two edge rushers on the both ends, it's gonna be too much. He's gonna be scared. He's gonna be timid. I don't see it happening. I don't see.
We got to figure out some way to get some sort of a Joe Burrow's bet going on next week. So stay tuned. We'll figure out something on that one soon.
I'm down for that. Well, my next sit is going to be speaking of quarterbacks, Matthew Stafford. He's playing against the Bears. He didn't play last year against the Bears because he did have that injury. So there's no recent stats to kind of compare him to. But since he did play the Bears, I mean, they definitely upgraded for sure. In all facets of defensive positions. When he did play them back in 2018, he combined for 2 games of only 24 points. So he doesn't really have a good track record against the Bears. And there is reports that Kenny G is just not going to be available, his number 1 target. And I personally don't think Amendola and Marvin Jones is going to be able to carry the team offensively against that Bears D. So, no Kenny G. Stafford's definitely on the bench for me.
I find it hard not to agree. I think Kenny G, he's basically a second, third round guy. He's a top 10 receiver in most people's books.
Yeah.
When you lose someone like that, it's tough to put up points. And we saw yesterday, first game without a top 3 receiver. It was pretty hard for a certain Texans team to really keep it going. I'm not saying, Kenny G is DeAndre Hopkins, but for that offense, he's their main man in the receiving game. Obviously, you got Marvin Jones there, but he's been the guy that's been breaking out onto the scene. He's smooth Kenny G. And if he's out, I don't see how Stafford's an appealing option for you. And where you drafted him, you probably have other players that you could slot right in over him, or you can even look for your waiver wire at that point if you're on the same boat as us and are feeling a little uncomfortable with the situation for this weekend.
Check out our QB streamers video for that, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I want to hate this. I want to push back on this so much. With Darren Bevel coming in last year, Stafford was on pace for 5,000 yards and over 30 touchdowns. Yeah, I mean, last year it looked like that was finally going to be the year that he was going to be able to put it all together and they were going to be able to do something. The record that they have really undersold how well the team performed. Yeah. But no Kenny G, half a Kerryon Johnson, no DeAndre Swift, old man AP back there. I think everything is kind of stacked up against them, especially with how that Chicago defense has been. And it's like you said, I think without Kenny G, you lose some of the upside. So yeah. I don't want to chase after a safer quarterback pick. If you're already going to be making a streaming option, go for some upside, go for an actual chance to win your week, not just a chance to not lose it.
Yeah, true.
Agree with all that.
All right, folks. Well, hey, that wraps us up. If you have any start-sit questions, feel free to reach out to us. Twitter, Instagram, all the social media handles. We'll have that streaming on the bottom of the screen right here. And if not, we'll see you next week. Good luck on Sunday.